Hi, everyone. My name is Justine Gronwald, and this video that we're doing right now, this interview, is all about bringing awareness to domestic violence and abuse. And I have a special guest today. He's the very first one that's going to be recorded for this very special campaign. What we want to do is do a video channel, a podcast channel. We're going to combine all the important information and put it in a book. So we're doing this as a campaign. If anyone wants to support the campaign, please go to www.seedthebooks.org, and where you can donate, find out more about what we're planning to do with this. We want to take the book into schools such as middle school, high school, and colleges, because these are the young people that have those who have witnessed violence in their home growing up. The chances are that they may repeat it in their adulthood. So we want to do preventative measures to bring awareness of how to deal with relationship situations. So with that said, Dr. Neill Neill has donated to that campaign, not only monetarily, but he's also donated his expertise and his knowledge. And so I'm going to do a little introduction of him, and we'll go from there. So at the end of 2013, Dr. Neill Neill retired his psychology practice, where he had focused on trauma, alcoholism, and marriages in trouble. As a columnist, he wrote many articles on these topics. You can go to his website at www.neillneill.com, and that's Neill with 2 L's. He maintains an active coaching practice via telephone or Skype with select clients dealing with alcoholic husbands or ex-husbands. You may also check his book out called Living with a Functioning Alcoholic, a woman's survival guide. And you can find that on Amazon. You can just Google it and you'll find it. So with that being said, Dr. Neill, why don't you talk a little bit about yourself before we get into the questions?
Well, I've been around these woods for a long time. My first endeavor many years ago in the 70s, a bunch of 4 other men and 1 woman, we got together and wrote a proposal to get the initial funding to establish a women's shelter in the town I lived in. It was the first one in Ontario. And I don't know if it's still running, but I know it did run for many years. And in those days, we called it a rape crisis center, but the politically correct is a women's shelter.
Okay.
So that was near the beginning of my involvement with women who were experiencing domestic abuse.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's get right into the questions.
Okay.
What have you found is the common thread between all of the clients you have counseled who have been domestically abused, either emotionally and or physically? What was the most common thing that you would see the first time they sat with you?
Probably the most common thing is the tendency to blame themselves for the abuse they're receiving.
Right.
Often alcohol is involved. The abuse, if the husband is a drinker, the level of abuse is often greater. And most of the women in the situation, if you ask them how they're doing, one of the first things they say is they feel lonely.
Yeah, because they can't turn to anyone.
They can't turn to anyone. That would be breaking the unwritten agreement they have with their husbands that they keep family secrets. What goes on at home, they don't tell anybody about. And so there's guilt involved too, even if they're telling the psychologist about it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And another thing that's, I wouldn't say it's universal, but almost universal. And that is, they say they love their husbands in spite of what's going on.
I did the same too. When I was abused by one of my former husbands, um, I did feel like it was my fault. In fact, when we would get into altercations, I remember that first time he gave me that black eye. I called my mom and she picks me up. My mom took off from work just special to come pick me up, and I stayed at her house for a couple of days. And I remember calling him, and he told me that it was my fault, that I made him so angry that he hit me. So it really was all my fault. And I actually told him I was sorry, that I loved him, and that I was sorry, that, I was going to try everything in my power to love him even more so he wouldn't get angry at me enough to hit me. But of course, we're going to go further into this interview, what you found.
Yeah, that never works. But
Yeah. And how many years, Dr. Neill, that you have been in this field of expertise?
well, the first decade or so of my career, my professional career, I was a teacher at university level, and so it's been in the last 25 years that I've been actively involved with clients, among whom are the ones that are dealing with domestic abuse. Before that, it was just occasionally, but professionally, it's been the last 25 years.
Okay. So we covered that first question. The second question I'd like to ask you, Dr. Neill, is that many listeners and viewers may be surprised to learn that some people don't realize or feel that they're actually being abused. What are the signs, or how can someone recognize the cycle of abuse? What are the telltale signs? Because a lot of people, usually the abuser is a great manipulator and controller because that's what it's all about. But what are some of the signs of abuse aside from the obvious physical? But sometimes, a lot of times there's a lot of emotional and mental abuse, correct?
Yes. The biggest thing, I think, is shame.
Mm.
And it seems to be so pervasive within this group. If you have a friend who's ashamed of her life, she may well be suffering abuse. Because remember, abuse is put down, being talked down to, for the purposes of control, and it's not a good place to be in. I was emotionally and verbally abused in a past marriage, and I didn't recognize it until years later.
Right, and I want to address that too later. But what I posted in my Facebook, for those of you that want to keep up with us, also go to the Facebook. It's called "End the Silence of Domestic Violence." And yesterday I posted something about that. It's not a gender issue. It's a generational issue, that if someone has learned these violent behaviors somehow, some way, the likelihood of them is that they'll pass it on into their adult relationships, and that is equally between men and women. So because there's been a big movement to protect women, which I really, really, really believe there should be protection for women. The men have been virtually left out, that there's a lot of men who are being put down, who are pinched, who are scratched, who are slapped, who are attacked. And a lot of people, just especially in high school or growing up, they just emulate what they've seen, and they do it as a knee-jerk reaction, that if something upsets them, the first thing to do is lash out. And what a lot of people don't understand how to do is have a civil, respectful, mature relationship. So I really, really, throughout this campaign, I want to show that it's not only the women that are being battered, but the men as well. And so I know that isolation has a lot to do with it, right? That is a
Yes.
telltale sign that you start withdrawing from your family. Um, and he has total control, and all of a sudden family members and friends don't see you anymore if you're being controlled in that situation. All of a sudden they don't see you at parties, they don't see you at get-togethers, or even on the phone. I think a lot of women or whoever is being abused is afraid that when their phone rings, right, especially with cell phones, you know, the cell phone rings and you're like, oh, he or she is going to see that and just like get on me about it.
Yeah.
You see that happening?
Yes. And I certainly haven't dealt with as many men that are abused. And I think the reason is that so many men are just totally ashamed of what's going on. They just don't
Right.
want to tell anybody.
Gender, yeah, gender embarrassment, because the man is supposed to be the tough guy, right? But you know, in my eyes, we're all human, and that we should love each other and respect each other no matter what gender we are. And later on in the campaign, I want to bring experts on how to have a what a good relationship should look like. So that would be the signs of if someone's in an abusive um, relationship. So this next question is pretty much what we've been talking about. Statistics show that 1 out of 4 women have been abused at least once in their lives, and that 1 out of 7 men have been abused as well. And I asked, you know, I'm asking if you've counseled men, but you're mostly counseling wives, right, and girlfriends,
Yes.
mostly females. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. What are the longer terms effects that you've seen on the children who live in these abusive households? Because experts say that the same PTSD, post-traumatic syndrome disorder symptoms found in military soldiers are the same experienced by these children, except they're exposed to it on a regular basis, sometimes daily, and they're exposed to it for that's a busy highway. They're exposed to it for many years, and it's taking place in their homes, which should be a nurturing place. And then it's all throughout their adult childhood, when in their teen years into adult years. So I'm treating all these women, especially the ones with women. What have you seen as the children being affected by all of this?
Well, they definitely, the children are affected, um, but the most long-lasting effect is the tendency for them to do it to their children, and then the next generation and the next generation. And I knew a young woman who had been abused by her mother, and and her mother had suffered abuse, and so she was a beautiful young woman, very talented, and at 22 years old, she had her tubes tied because,
What?
yes, because she didn't believe, she said, with the upbringing I've had, I don't want to inflict this on more children, and so I'm not going to have any children. And she hasn't. That's
Wow,
a that's a
that that
pretty heavy
that's
duty
extreme.
personal effect. And the her mother um, had well her she remembered her father as being the stable one in the household who held things together, and and um, then she remembered her father pulling her out of the water and saving her from drowning at one point. And it turned out her mother told her that her father had tried to kill one or another of the children a number of times, and he was drowning her and changed his mind and pulled her out. Well, she remembered it as him saving
I'm
her,
saving her.
but he was trying to
Yeah.
kill her. And so you can
Wow.
imagine what that would do to a person's scrambling their thinking process.
That's traumatic for kids, and for that is like extreme long-term effect for someone that, it's like she's trying to save the next generation
Yeah,
because she might have the same tendencies, right?
yeah.
Now,
But
let me ask you this.
that also illustrated another thing, in that it was her father who was trying to kill her, but she remembered her father as being the one who was stable and held things together. So that illustrates the point that abused kids often cling to the abuser.
Exactly, exactly. Well, by nature, our parents are the ones that are supposed to nurture us by nature.
Yes.
And when they don't get that, their view of parenthood and how to have a relationship is very skewed. It's very twisted, and they don't know what a healthy relationship is. And there's so many of them out there.
The other thing I've seen, I worked for a number of years in an Indian village as a psychologist, and quite a few people there had been, or their parents had been in residential school and had suffered abuse there. And their own kids were abused and often quite traumatized by what their parents did. And then they were doing it to their kids. It just seemed to be a scramble of domestic abuse as a result of in multiple generations, as a result of one or two generations being in residential school.
Mm-hmm.
That was very
And
sad.
that's yeah, and that's why we want to bring the message out to the young people. I know there's many organizations already doing that, but we just want to bring it out through videos and through a podcast channel and the book. So, hopefully, with God leading us, we can get into the schools and help turn these kids around to let them know it doesn't have to be that way, and take that extreme measure, like that young woman you talked about, who tied her tubes up because she was so afraid she might do the same to her kids. At least she was thinking, but that's super radical, right, Dr.
Yes.
Neill? Okay, so um, let's get to the next question.
Okay.
Statistics show that it takes about 7 times or attempts before an abused person finally leaves the abusive relationship. Can you highlight the reasons why it takes that many times or longer or at all before someone leaves? You before we got on air, we talked earlier about how codependency plays into it. And then, so why don't you start with that codependency, and then maybe go down other reasons or dynamics why an abused person takes that many times to leave, if at all.
Okay. Okay. Well, first of all, codependency starts off as a normal behavior. A woman has a baby and she's very attached, bonded with the baby. Um, if you see a woman, if a woman loses a child, a small child, an infant, the grief is extreme. It's as if part of her has died. But that, in fact, is what has happened, because the child was totally dependent on her, and she was merged with the child identity in terms of her identity. So when the child died, she was losing part of herself, part of her identity. And our kids grow up and we teach them to be independent, and we gradually work our way out of that way of thinking about the relationship. But if a woman or a man is abused, um, they often in the situation they've put so much effort into looking after the abusive partner so that he won't misbehave that she merges with him, merges identities with him. And so if she goes to leave, it feels like part of herself is dying. So back she is, and then she realizes it's a mistake. It's the same old thing, and she pulls away again. But then it doesn't feel right, and he sweet talks her or bribes her or whatever, and she's back again. And it happens over and over, and if it doesn't end in something that goes to the police, it often does take a number of attempts before she finally does make the break. And maybe when she does make the break, it's in the context of something that does become public. Like he got a DUI while he had the kids out in the car. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And so finally
there's always that straw that breaks the camel's back. And it can, for me, it was in a very subtle way. It wasn't in a very abusive situation or anything. It was just the words that came out. And after almost 20 years of it, I just said something inside me, just like the camel that broke the straw that broke the camel's back. It did. I just got up and left and never turned back. It's just something inside can only take so much that's it. And then you seek ways of how to go on with your life. And I know you'll talk about that a little bit later about what your advice is to do that moving on. So let's get to another question.
Okay.
On your website, you stated that heavy drinking masks a deeper issue. I have learned that when people are hurt, they hurt others. How have you counseled your clients to take a deeper look at the root of their drinking or whatever they may be addicted to? Even anger can be very addictive, and the abuse that results from it. How do you have them go into that deeper root of what's the cause of them getting into drinking, whatever addiction they have, that affects their relationships?
Well, that getting into it and going deep there usually involves some psychotherapeutic techniques. I use quite a bit of energy psychology. I found I could get, there's a great deal of resistance to going deeper.
Yes.
I have one problem. I drink too much. I don't want to look at anything else. I'm afraid all hell will break loose. If I go deeper, my wife might leave me, or my husband might not want me anymore. So there's resistance, but I can't exactly give you a series of steps or actions to take, except that it comes under the heading of psychotherapeutic interventions. And many people don't get to it. They just don't go deep enough. But if they haven't dealt with it, say the ones I met in the treatment center, if they don't deal with it, if they don't go a little bit deeper, then we see them again in 6 months. They haven't really made a shift.
Yeah, but we should applaud anyone who's trying to do anything they can, and even baby steps. I feel
yes.
Everything, because what happened with me is that I always wondered why in the world were people abusing me and using me, and I was a self-help book junkie at the Borders when they were still open.
Yeah.
You would find me there just I was just searching. I'm like, why in the world do people want to hurt me if I'm such a nice person and I go, above and beyond to help them out or whatever? Why, because I was pretty much a doormat. I had to take ownership of that. But I think we should applaud anyone, even if you're watching this right now. I applaud you for wanting to know more, because that just shows that you have this urge to improve yourself. And especially if you have children, right, Dr. Neill, it's so important that changes be made for the sake of your kids, not just yourself, but the sake of your kids. So
That's a really important point. The way I put it is, be careful what you model for your kids. And when it comes to a marriage that is not working, whether it's because of alcohol abuse or other domestic abuse, the way I look at it is, if you wouldn't want your son or daughter to stay in a marriage no matter what, to stay in a bad marriage no matter what, then don't model it for them.
but the crazy thing is, we don't think about that, do we? We just don't think about that.
Well,
I mean, honestly.
right, but that's one thing I ask, what are you modeling?
Right.
You want your kids to have the same thing? If you don't, well, then we got to change something.
Good point. Okay, so let's go on to the next question, and we may have touched a little bit on it. What are the steps that you've counseled your clients to take in order to break away from the cycle of abuse? Have you referred them to outside agencies, shelters, organizations in your area? I know that prior to us coming together for this interview, you mentioned the most dangerous time to leave, how to make a plan, and even talk to an attorney before you make a move. So maybe touch on some of those things.
Okay. The most important thing is safety.
Exactly.
If you're not safe, then you do need to get out of there. The most dangerous time is right around the leaving, or in the month following the departure, because remember, the husband is abusive. If it is the husband doing the abusing, the husband is abusive as a means of control. And if you leave, he's not controlling you. So the anger escalates. And often when women are killed by their ex-boyfriends, it's in that period of a month or a few months following the separation, because he's been unable to control. So maybe he's reverted to stalking or something, but he just doesn't want you to be out of his control. And when I say make a plan, if you're going to leave, figure out that you're going to, figure out where you're going to go, keep a gym bag or something with basic supplies and some money in the trunk of your car. Keep it where you are with a neighbor. Keep it where you can get it and get away. And don't tell them. Just don't.
I think you mentioned that. And I'm like, well, why would you want to tell them? But then
A lot of
people don't
people
realize that a lot of people don't realize that they're so they've been controlled for so long that they feel compelled that they have to share things, even though the guy is going to use it against them.
And then he will turn around and up the pressure to control, because discussing leaving is discussing leaving his control. So in some cases, one case I remember where the there were children involved, and they were at risk from the husband as well. Um, I advised her not only to leave, but make a plan to disappear, move to a different province,
Wow.
just be 1,000 miles away. Um, that doesn't solve anything, but it takes the pressure off, because he's going to have to spend money and take time to go to the community. He isn't going next door to the next town to stalk. He's got to make and a lot of times that's enough to gradually get him to lose interest and not pursue that. So that's a safety thing. And the reason I say talk to a lawyer is sometimes the lawyer may advise not to leave the matrimonial home. Stay there. But when he's away, change the locks and perhaps sync that with getting a no contact order or getting a no contact order.
A TRO, because you're in Vancouver, you're on Vancouver Island, Canada, where
Yes.
I'm in Hawaii, but this pretty much can apply to anyone. In Hawaii, it's called a temporary restraining order, and I think there's another one as well for domestic violence, where if the cops come, they have to separate and stay away from each other for 48 hours to cool down.
Yeah. Well, what different states and provinces have their own rules and their own names for things, but it is taking legal action. In one case, the man, she had a house, and he went into the house and took control of it and had one of the children. And she actually had to, with the other kids, go to court and get him ordered out of the house. So that was her home.
Yeah.
So the not getting a lawyer, in my opinion, especially in situations like this, is just asking for a lot more hurt than it's bad enough as it is, without making mistakes that cost you dearly or put you at more risk.
Okay, so we covered those 3 points, and I also want to later on put a link down below for the domestic violence hotline, or you can Google it anytime. Make sure you have those numbers handy, but I'll have them at the bottom of the description of this video, just in case for reference. And then, so in conclusion, while it is clearly not the fault of the abused person that they are abused, at the end of the day, it is everyone's sole responsibility to take proactive action in order to make changes to improve their situation. So changing takes a lot of courage to do so. How have you helped your clients to get to that point?
Well, I've talked with them at length about what they model for their children. I've helped them put together an escape plan. When blocks come up, emotional blocks come up, we'll do some psychotherapeutic things to release them from those blocks. I provide immediate support during and after the breakup, and then ongoing support, usually for a few months after the breakup, because things come up and they need to deal with them. So I get pretty heavily involved as they move on, and occasionally with their at a client's request, I even am in contact with a lawyer, and we're working as a team on their situation. So, yeah, that period after the separation the support is very important there. But you're right; they have
yeah,
to make the choice.
right.
That's their responsibility to do that. But they
Mm-hmm.
can also choose to get as much support as they need to do it with some level of
Yeah.
peace.
And I wanted you to bring up that story about that woman. She had an alcoholic husband, and you counseled her for a bit, and she said, "Oh, don't worry. You know, he gets violent, but he
Yeah,
doesn't hit me. He hits
yeah.
the wall or
He was
destroys other."
punching. He
Yeah.
was
So
punching
you,
holes in the wall, and he was breaking furniture. As it escalated, and he yelled, and she said, "I can handle him." And I pointed out to her that um, a drunken man in a rage, sometimes 6 policemen can't hold him down. So why does she think she can? I said, "Oh, I can. I know him. I know how to handle him." And then a few months later, she was back to see me, and she said, "Well, I left him. I finally did leave him, and things are going much better now." She said, "I waited until he broke my arm, and then I left."
yeah, sometimes that's a huge wake up call. Unfortunately, the straw that breaks the camel's back can be so extreme and so dangerous. And so I believe people don't have to wait that long before they seek help. There's help everywhere. And as this campaign progresses, we want to link people up with as many resources as possible. This is our maiden voyage interview into the whole campaign. So I thank you so much, Dr. Neill, for sharing your wealth of experience. I know there's a lot of information out there, but believe it or not, there's so many people who have never heard of this. You know, there's so many people. You have talk shows, you have books, you have everything. I feel that there's never enough awareness, especially in such a big epidemic as domestic violence.
Yes. Could I mention one more item?
Sure, go ahead.
Money.
Yes.
The
Yes.
money is often um, stated as the reason she can't leave.
Right.
And I remember one time there were 2 women I was dealing with via the net, and they were both being abused, and it was clear that they both needed to leave their marriages. One of them, the husband, um, he was a laborer, and they really didn't have much money. And the other one, the husband was I forget what he did, but they lived well. And a couple of months later, I got an email from both of the women, and the woman who really had no means said, "I'm living in some subsidized housing with my children, and leaving him was the best decision I ever made. We're so much happier, and things are going well. We've got welfare, and this is good." The other woman, in her email, said that she didn't leave her husband because she realized that if they had to divide the resources they had, it would reduce her standard of living, and so she just couldn't afford to make the move. So it isn't the absolute amount of money that makes the difference, but it often is a hang up that people have that I can't do this, I don't have the money to do it. Well, that's what separation agreements are for. That's why you need help. There is the money. There's always a way. Um, Maybe you will be
Yeah,
on welfare for a
yeah,
while.
I'd say if you're desperate enough, because I was in that same situation. This former husband of mine, I helped him build a business, and we pretty much had a first class kind of lifestyle we were, living. The business was doing really well, and people think money will make you happy. Well, I remember one day just sitting on the bed talking to God and saying, "I'm not happy. I just not happy. There's a Jaguar in the garage. You fly first class. You go to a five-star restaurant, stay at five-star hotels, but it's so empty. It's so fleeting." And I understand where that second woman is coming from, because when I decided to make my move, I knew I was going to go backwards in a hurry with my lifestyle, because the way the divorce was, he had two properties. My name, he took so much control. My name was not any of on the deeds, and we were legally married. I helped him build that business to a multi-million-dollar business. Pretty much, I didn't get anything. So finances is a huge area that the person who is controlling you will hang over your head. And while money is nice, it cannot save your life. It cannot bring back your spirit, because your spirit gets beaten down so often. You become a good actor though, right? In front of everybody,
Yes.
you look pretty good. You got the nice house, you got the nice car, you're going to nice places, all of that. But at the end of the day, when you're all alone in that house with that person, you're stepping on eggshells, you're walking on eggshells every day. You don't know when he's gonna like go into a crazy schizo episode, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so yeah, I understand that part. I've experienced every single part, the finances, not wanting to be alone as a woman. I wanted security, but at the end of the day, did I want this guy hitting me, choking me? I remember one time he grabbed me from behind, and he had his arm under my neck and just lifted me off the ground and dragged me with my legs hanging. Another time I was trying to run away from him. I got in my car. Before I could start the car, he punched his hand right through the window and just grabbed me. The glass all over me, little cuts, just grabbed me and dragged me out of that car. I'm like, do I want to continue this madness? No.
No. No.
Yeah. But anyway, I know that we're going to be interviewing survivors of abuse to tell their story of how they left. And not every story is where you leave the person that's abusing you, but the likelihood is huge that you have to sever yourself to save yourself and your kids. I'd like to find survivors that have stayed in a marriage, worked it out. Maybe he went to counseling, whatever it is, he or she. I'd like to find those survivors. So for right now, though, I want to thank you so much for bringing some great points about this, the abuse and your expertise. And if there's any other things that you want to tell the audience out there, maybe those are watching this really scared. They're like, I'm watching this video right now, and if my partner finds out that I'm learning all this, it's scary. What do you say to that person?
Don't tell them. Don't tell them you've been watching it. You're watching it. You're gathering your information to make your own decisions, to make your own choices, no matter what way they go. I just want to. One other thing I'd like to say. This is a personal thing, but I really believe in marriage.
Me too. I've
And
been married 3 times, but I
it's,
think if I ever get married again, it'll be a wiser decision making thing. But go ahead, go ahead.
it's the third time for me too, and um, it took a couple of marriages for me to figure it out. I think, to put it lightly. Um, but Eileen and I have been married now for 35 years.
Congratulations.
So I do believe in marriage. And I know that some people would suspect that I'm not being straightforward about it, because so often I am advising people to leave their marriage. but
Yeah.
but sometimes when safety is involved and well-being, sometimes that's what has to happen.
Thank you
And
for
I
sharing that.
want to thank you, Justine, for inviting me to take part in this. I feel you honor me. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. No, thank you. And I'm going to make sure we have the links to get a hold of you. As you can see, Dr. Neill has his website below his name. But if you want to get a hold of his book, I'll put the links in there as well. And we're going to have a lot more experts, but I just want to thank Dr. Neill for raising his hand and saying yes. He'd be the first interview for this whole campaign. So I just want to thank you.
Well, you're most welcome, Justine.
All right, so until we get to the next interview, get onto our Facebook. You'll find us on Facebook called End the Silence of Domestic Violence. If you want to give to this campaign or pass it on to others, please do go to www.seedthebooks.org. If you want to lend your expertise, if you're a survivor who is safe right now, safe to talk, even if you want to talk about your story and we can reveal your identity just so you can help others. Anyone who wants to help, just right now you can write to me at my podcast email, which is Justine at legaladviceinparadise.com. You can write to me there, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Legal Advice in Paradise. I'm going to create a separate YouTube channel eventually, and then the podcast channel. So stay tuned for that. And we just thank you for tuning in. If you find anyone you can share this with, please pass this on. It's really, really crucial that awareness is spread virally. So thank you again, Dr. Neill.
You're most welcome.
And we'll see you next time on this domestic violence awareness campaign. So aloha from Hawaii.
Okay, good night, everyone.